Monica Pearson. One-on-One. Sponsored by Montlick Injury Attorneys.
Good evening. My guests tonight include two actors who have played memorable roles in film and TV. Academy Award-winning actor Kevin Costner, who has starred in numerous critically acclaimed films. The other grew up on TV in a hit sitcom, The Cosby Show. That's where Malcolm-Jamal Warner made his mark and became best known for playing Theo on the show. We begin with Kevin Costner, who I went one-on-one with when he was in town to promote Horizon, an American Saga. Not only does Costner star in the new 4-part movie series, but he's also the creator, co-writer, producer, and director. Horizon, an American Saga, is aptly named, since one definition of saga is a dramatic and often complicated story or series of events. This is more than a Western. It is the story of clashing cultures, Native Americans and Western settlers, and their similarities and concerns. It's the story of families and the roles of women in a new frontier. It's a story of survival, deception, and as the press kit says, it explores the lure of the Old West and how it was won and lost through the blood, sweat, and tears of many. For Kevin Costner, this idea and his character, Hayes Ellison, have been percolating in his brain since 1988.
You know, when I had the first script in 1988, there was a scene where the character asked me, "Where were you?" And I says, "I'm in Montana. What happened up there?" And he goes, "I had some trouble with some guys." That's the only line in 1988 movie. But now, in the movie you just watched, you saw 45 minutes of these people I had trouble with, right?
Right.
So that became important to me. These 4 movies, this journey, for you to revisit that first one before you go to that second one, and then to feel your own American weave of these characters. I love the movies. I love when the lights go out, because anything can happen, and an anthole suddenly gets a stake right in the heart of it.
The movie, for me, also shows the brutality of all people.
All. We're vicious. The Indians had the right, the white mountains had the right to attack. They've been invaded, they were hunted like animals ultimately. And you see that in the end, you know, that it doesn't really matter if the hair is black, right? Does it really matter? It's important for me to have language like in that. To show that these people this was commerce. And so at the end, when you see the collecting of scalps, it's just about money.
What is applicable in this movie today? What are the stories that we should look at this and see how we can use it to better ourselves?
Well, there was a lack of respect. There was a level of ignorance. People were misled by information that if you go out there, you can have this land. It was a lie. We can't lie to our people. And that people came, and they kept coming. There was a piece of paper that said, "We own this. You can own that." It was a lie. And you're going to meet him too. He's coming. And so I made this movie for you. I made a movie for myself, and I'm only sad that I won't ever get to see it the way you will, because I know what's happening, you know. I just wish somebody would have made this for me.
$38 million of your own money went into this.
Oh, more than that.
But it's worth it.
No, a lot more than that. A lot. To me, I've been really blessed. I've been really lucky, you know, and I've watched a pile grow that I never thought would. I never thought that. I just wanted to be who I was. And now that when I understand the things that I want to do and I can't do them, I think, well, I can use this. And the big thought is, well, you don't want to risk this. And I go, no, of course I don't. But I don't want this pile to kind of be the guide of my heartbeat, what I want to do in this life. Of course I want to protect my family, so I'll stay. But this can't guide me. This can't be what defines me. What defines me has to be what my relationship is with my work and how my work relates to people who go do the same thing I do, which is I go to the movies to see things and feel things that I might not ever forget. And that's what the movies are.
Costner wasn't always a fan of Westerns. Up next, the movie that captured his attention and influenced his filmmaking career. And later, you know him as Theo from The Cosby Show. But I'll introduce you to the poet, the podcaster, and the parent. Costner is a fan of Westerns. When he was growing up, there were plenty on TV, including The Lone Ranger and his Native American sidekick, Tonto, Bonanza, and the all-male Cartwright family on their Nevada ranch, and then Gunsmoke with Marshal Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty in Dodge City, Kansas.
Well, I'll tell you honestly, I didn't like them very much. No, I watched them because they were, exciting or whatever. But when I watched How the West Was Won, there was something authentic about it. The canoe I saw was birch bark. The clothes were leather, and there was hair, and there were feathers. And the people that this canoe was going to meet had people, and they were dressed authentically. And they were exotic to me. I'm like 7 years old, and I'm thinking, these people are beautiful. And what happened was, I started to realize that costumes needed to be authentic. Everything needed to be authentic, and I was drawn into the movie. I was suddenly in that world. And most Westerns weren't going that deep. They all had this look, and so I didn't like them. I don't like that many Westerns, but I love the Western when it scares me. I love the Western when it feels authentic, when I feel a nobility, when I feel a ferociousness, when I feel an injustice, and I feel, when I feel a lot, it's because it feels authentic to me, that a death moves me. And too often in Westerns, the deaths didn't move me. But when I got to know a person as a character and we lost him, it moved me. And that's what I expect in the dark when I go to the movies, is to be moved.
Well, the thing that moved me about the movie was the authenticity, particularly when it came to the Navajo Nation. How much input did you ask from them to make sure the language was authentic, the clothes they wore were authentic? How did they come into play to make this authenticity?
And I looked, and we have these black and white photographs to understand that pictures don't lie, right? Artists embellish, but black and white pictures don't. And thank God we were able to get pictures of that, and we used authentic, language, linguists for the thing, and our actors embraced it. They were all Native American, right down the line, every extra, every acting, speaking role.
Their language has pretty much not been moved from generation to generation. So how much teaching had to be involved?
Well, there had to be a lot of teaching, and a lot of it, it's a very difficult language, and it's just difficult. It was important to me, though, and then I had to subtitle it.
And that was one of the parts, too, to watch a movie where you had the subtitles in a language that has become so foreign to us. But there was something else that really touched me in the movie that I loved, and that was the Indian chief who had the son who had learned to speak English just as he had. You had so much diversity in the movie. The Black people who were in it, the Chinese people. Why was that so important to do?
Well, they keep having more influence, and three, a new character is coming in, African American, who will end up, I don't want to give away, but everything grows. The Chinese continue to grow. You'll begin to understand why that little boy in the second one, why does he know English? Why does he? And you'll find out in two why he does.
You're right? Such a historian. Where did that come from?
Because it's human nature. We don't always know. We think we know something on the surface, but then all of a sudden we realize, you quickly thought, well, one does and one doesn't. And then you think, me as a storyteller, I have to ultimately tell you why. Okay? I just didn't have time to tell you why in the first one. I didn't want to do that. But there's a really good reason why.
That's Kevin Costner's son, Hayes, who was 13 when the movie was made. In the film, he stays to fight beside his father while his sister and mother hide and survive by breathing air from a rifle barrel pushed through the earth to the surface.
And so what happened is movies are powerful in our life. And when they're careful, they can become about moments we'll never forget in our life. And you watch a little boy say to his father, I'm going to stay up with you. And we know that that's a fatal moment. When you watch a mother and a daughter share a breath through a gun, breath after breath, and survive, these are moments that we never forget. We learned how to kiss at the movies. We learned I was screwed once I saw Sean Connery. I thought, well, the dude, he's the coolest guy that's ever gonna live. I just saw it, I think, I'm not gonna catch him. But our parents, the movies were the first place that was kind of safe. We could go by ourselves. And we did learn what romance was. And we learned what honor was. And we learned what dishonor was. And when we look at the movies, we said, who do we want to be? For as fake as movies are, we also can see who we wish we were. And that's what's the truth about movies. And when we create that architecture, we create moments we can never forget.
When the film was shown in May at the Cannes Film Festival, there was a memorable moment for Costner. At the end of the film, he received an 11-minute standing ovation from the audience. He was visibly moved. You and Whitney Houston in The Bodyguard.
Yeah.
That was a moment.
That was a moment for me too.
Yeah. So thank you.
And I'll tell you something else. I kissed her once for everybody in America. I kissed her once really good for me.
Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1 was released June 28th. The film is 3 hours long. There currently is no release date set for Chapter 2, and Chapter 3 is being shot now. He spent his childhood playing Theo on The Cosby Show. Up next, I go one-on-one with Malcolm-Jamal Warner, who talks about his next chapter as a poet, musician, and podcaster. My next guest started acting at age 9. Most remember him as the son, Theo Huxtable, on The Cosby Show. Malcolm-Jamal Warner is a former child actor, approaching age 54. He's an actor, a poet, a musician, a director, and now a podcaster with co-hosts Candace O'Kelly and Yusu Baraka. Their Atlanta-based podcast is named Nah, Not All Hood.
We wanted to, based on just conversations that we would have, right, between the three of us, we wanted to have a forum where we could talk about all aspects of the Black community. Because as you know, when we refer to the Black community, we refer to it as if it's a monolith. And clearly we are not. And because we are so bombarded with the stereotypical narrative of the hood and that seems to be the lopsided aspect of the community, because that's what gets shed the most light, if you will. We wanted to have a podcast that, one, combats the stereotypical narrative, but also allows space to acknowledge all aspects of the Black community. One of my favorite quotes from Henry Louis Gates a couple of years ago: there are 42 million Black people in America. Therefore, there are 42 million ways of being Black. Right?
Right.
So we wanted to just kind of, take that concept and run with it and really, be able to discuss and have guests who represent all of those lanes. And, all of those lanes may not necessarily coincide with, where my lane is. There would be perspectives that I won't necessarily agree with. I'll have perspectives that won't necessarily jive with everybody else. But this is a place where we can discuss and respectfully disagree or challenge each other for the sake of knowledge and understanding.
And when you hear nah, in our community, that definitely means no.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, so nah, we're not all hood. Despite what the media tells you, nah, we're not all hood.
This is going to be fun to watch. Now, you talked about your co-host. They're in Atlanta. How'd y'all meet?
So Wayusi and I have been friends for 20 plus years now. We used to run the midnight poetry jams at the National Black Theater Festival. We started that like in 2001. So I've known Wayusi for a long time. So when we first talked about doing the podcast, we were really looking to do something surrounding Black fathers, because he and I are both older fathers. His daughter's 9, my daughter's 7. And we were sitting in my truck one day and just talking about the life. And then we're like, this could be a podcast. So that was the initial idea for the podcast, like from a Black, life from a Black father, older Black father's perspective. So we had actually interviewed Candace as a producer. And then we got on this, like our first Zoom call was probably like an hour and a half. And by the time we finished the Zoom call, it was like, we need to have Candace as a co-host and we need to open this up. And then that's how the Not All Hood concept came about.
Nah, Not All Hood is a new venture. Poetry, writing, and performing it is Malcolm-Jamal's first love.
You gotta finish the story. I want to know what happened. Like, did you run up on a kid?
We were in school. No, because I was like in like kindergarten or first grade, so it wasn't.
Okay, but that was early.
It was early, yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the teacher, and be like, he called me.
Right.
At 6 years old, I told my parents I was either going to be a famous actor, a famous poet, or a famous basketball player.
You missed one.
Yeah. You don't want to see my game. You don't want to see my ball game. No, so I got 2 out of 3. It's fair to say that I was a poet before I was an actor. Like, it's really that ingrained in me. In 5th grade, my favorite book at the time was a book called Poems on the Life and Death of Malcolm X. And I would bring this book to school and keep it on my desk in 5th grade, and kids would kind of joke, oh, somebody wrote a book about you? Ha, ha, ha. And it was at that point that I realized what my dad had been doing with me all these years. He was providing me a supplemental education that my classmates did not have. Like, all they knew was Dr. King. They never heard of Malcolm X. And we're in 5th grade. So my dad was really influential in giving me that sense of history, that sense of culture. When I would see my dad on my summer vacations, because my parents divorced when I was 6, and I would go to Chicago every summer, and my father had this thick book called Great American Negroes, and there were chapters on Langston Hughes, Richard Wright, and Mary McLeod Bethune, Marian Anderson, and I'd have to read these chapters and write book reports.
When One-on-One returns, the one simple thing his father did that set him up for success and still inspires him today. Plus, the reality check from his mother that kept him grounded when The Cosby Show became a big hit. Then later, Malcolm explains his love-hate relationship with hip-hop.
Conscious hip-hop isn't getting exposure. The messages in hip-hop that get the exposure are misogyny, murder, mayhem, and disrespect of fellow Black people.
Malcolm-Jamal Warner was named after Malcolm X and jazz musician Ahmad Jamal by his father, Robert Warner Jr.
When I was 15, I was like, Malcolm-Jamal, Malcolm X, Ahmad Jamal. I called my father up. I said, man, you set me up. And he laughed. He said, you're damn right. Right? You cannot be named Malcolm-Jamal, right? You cannot be named after Malcolm X and Ahmad Jamal and not be great. You can't. It wasn't so much pressure when I realized it at 15. It was, I guess it felt like I had I'm trying to find the words.
You came into yourself.
Thank you. That's where I was looking. Yeah. Like it all made sense. The going to schools and speaking to kids and my messages of self-responsibility and self-accountability and knowing from whence we've come. Like it all made sense. And my dad had carefully designed that from the womb.
I like your dad.
Yeah, oh yeah.
His mother, Pamela, served as his manager and kept things real for a reason.
I tell the story all the time, and I will tell the story until my dying day. When Cosby first hit, it was this phenomenon out the box. I was 14. My mother sat me down and said, listen, baby, it's great that this show is the phenomenon that it is, but you know how this business is. This show could be over next year. What are you going to do when the show's over? She said, I can type. I can always get a job. What are you going to do when the show's over? And then we had a whole conversation about longevity. And she said, if you want longevity in this business, look at anyone who's had longevity. They've had periods where they've been hot and periods where they're not. You have to figure out what you're going to do during those periods when you're not hot, so you're not running around making desperate career choices. She told me that at 14. So at 14, while everyone is enjoying this #1 show, not just in the country, but in the world, like I'm a teenager walking around on the #1 television show in the world, not on some, I'm a TV star. I'm on what happens after this. Right? I think I was 15 or 16 and I saw the show, Where Are They Now?
Yes, I remember that show.
And it scared the bejesus out of me. I was like, I do not want to be one of those kids. So I've spent most of my adult life with this maniacal obsession with life after Cosby. Because the longevity conversation that my mom and I had, I was like, this is what I love. At 9 years old, I discovered that I loved being an actor. And if this is going to be the thing that I'm going to do for the rest of my life to pay my bills, then I've got to be able to do this for the rest of my life. So my trajectory had always been, I used to do interviews as a teenager and people would say, what's it like being successful at such a young age? And even at 15, 16, 17 years old, I would say, well, the show is successful. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm successful. I said, until I'm 40, 50, 60 years old and have worked consistently as an actor, then I'll be able to look back and say, I've had a successful career. So now that I'm 50 something, I think it's been this, like in the last 2 years, I am in my 50s. Okay, yes, it's safe to look back and say, wow, I've had a successful career. But there's still a long road ahead of me.
Well, what I love the fact you were at City Winery, and I've never heard of this, which shows you how much I've been out of it. Poetry versus hip hop.
Yeah.
Now, wait a minute. To me, they're the same. What's the difference? They're both poetry.
Yes, but hip hop is a little more rigid in terms of subject matter, in terms of the actual execution, because, hip hop is there's a rhythm and you have to get your words in, there are certain cadences because you got to fit in these bars of music. Whereas poetry, there's more freedom and more of an open field in terms of content and subject matter. Whereas, unfortunately, the success of hip hop is predicated upon being anti-Black.
Explain. Expound.
When you listen to the hip hop that gets the exposure, right? Conscious hip hop isn't getting exposure. The messages in hip hop that get the exposure are misogyny, murder, mayhem, and disrespect of fellow Black people. Right? That's not all of the hip hop that exists.
Right, but that's what mainly.
That's what gets. Yeah, like you can't have a popular hip hop song without using the N-word.
Or calling women horrible names.
Yeah. It's like our Black music has somehow become anti-Black, and it's been so normalized that it gets right by us.
And it just did with me.
Yeah. The conditioning, the programming it's so powerful. Like in all of my poetry, I constantly talk about my love-hate relationship with hip hop. Right? But when those of us who are hip hop purists and we talk about how, the younger generation, the hip hop is trash, well, we're complicit in that because the younger generation grew up watching us and listening to us, listen to what we listen to. The content isn't different. The skill set may not be as great, right? The execution may not be as great as was artistically, but the content really is the same. And most of that content, to be Black music, again, is really, a lot of it's anti-Black.
Ooh, excellent. So this poetry versus hip hop allows the audience to decide which is the better.
Yeah, and so it's an extension of poetry slams, right? Because poetry slams, it's poets going up against one another. The poetry versus hip hop opens it up, and at that point, just like in poetry slams, it becomes about the poet and their poem and the execution of it. When you've got the poetry versus hip hop, again, it's about this MC and his subject, his content, and his execution. And this poet and their poem and their execution. And it's
a battle royale.
Man, it really is.
Coming up next, Malcolm-Jamal Warner recites poetry and explains how a lack of vulnerability plays a part in the violence among Black men. Then later, she's someone you should know, not just for her food, but for what she's doing to give back. I'll introduce you to Ebony Austin, a young entrepreneur and philanthropist.
Black boys boast bravado not to seem broken, and often so do Black men. Vulnerability is a scary thing. And while I'm on the mend, my need is to love me and tend to my self-care. Hiding in plain view is really me deciding how much of my soul I'm willing to share.
I watched your TEDx performance.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
You said vulnerability can be a scary thing even when you're on the mend. Black boys boast bravado, not to seem broken, but often so do Black men.
Yeah.
I see you. How does this play, you think, into the violence that Black men often become a part of?
I think the lack of vulnerability plays a big part. So on my last album, Hiding in Plain View, which was nominated for a Grammy, is out of my 4 albums, it's probably my most important from a social consciousness perspective. And I attribute a large part of that to Dr. Daniel Black, who was all over the record. I had a conversation with him that he allowed me to record because there were some topics I wanted to put in this long bed of music. He dropped so much knowledge, I had to just cut it up and put him like all throughout the album. And the album starts out with just him. And he says, the thing about a Black boy is you don't necessarily want to beat a Black boy. What you want to do is you want to love him so fiercely. You want to love him so divinely that your disappointment would kill him. So that sparked this conversation about how vulnerability is what's missing in the Black father and son relationship. And I think you can zoom that out and say that the vulnerability is probably what's missing in most father-son relationships across the board. With Black fathers and sons specifically, oftentimes, that component is missing because, as Dr. Black says, we are still kind of in survival mode, right? Like, we're out here trying to teach our young boys how to survive amongst each other, how to survive when you get pulled over by the police, how to survive when you're navigating through a world where a system has been set up for you not to succeed. Like, we're still in survival mode. So to a large extent, sometimes the vulnerability part gets lost in that, or is not seen as important. Or if fathers have not been taught how to be vulnerable from their fathers, who haven't been taught from their fathers, the whole generational aspect of our father-son relationships, where our boys grow up boasting bravado, not to seem broken, because there's no space for the vulnerability that we all need, right? We all need to be able to express ourselves. But if there's no outlet to fully express ourselves, to find words for the hurt that we have or the anger that we have and don't even know why, but if we have no space to express that and to explore that, then it comes out in this rage. It comes out in the bravado. It comes out in the sense of cool that most non-Black people want, right? And don't necessarily have. But part of that is that cool comes from not having that place to be vulnerable. Like, we're not allowed to, men aren't allowed to cry.
But you allow yourself to cry.
Yeah. Because, I'm an artist. Like, there's another lane where I need access to all of my emotions. Just as an actor alone, forget the poetry, forget the musician. As an actor alone, the things that pays the bills, in order for me to be an effective actor, I have to make myself vulnerable. I have to have access to all of that. And I live in the world where having access to all of those emotions benefits me in my work, in my personal life. But there are some lifestyles where being vulnerable could cost you your life. So it's a real, it's a layered conversation about vulnerability, but it's a necessary conversation to have, because I think more men, and more Black men specifically, need to have that space to be able to access all of those feelings. So it's not just walking around in bravado and rage.
Malcolm-Jamal Warner likes to stay busy. He's had 10 television shows with recurring roles since The Cosby Show. While working for one network, he took up guitar to reduce stress.
I was like, I need a hobby. I need something. Acting started as a hobby. Directing started out as a hobby. Okay, if I play music, I'll never become one of those corny actors who get into the music business. I'll never start a band. I'll never record a CD. It'll just be a hobby. And clearly I don't know how to have hobbies. Because I ended up going to Musicians Institute. I ended up starting a band. I ended up playing in clubs. Then I ended up recording albums. I ended up playing jazz festivals and cruises. And I ended up with the Grammy. Like, it became its own thing. But once again, that was an avenue of expression that I needed. I needed to express myself again, in ways that I could not as an actor or as a director. And, when the poetry and the music kind of came together, that whole aspect of my life took off.
So tell me something people don't know about Malcolm-Jamal Warner that would surprise them. Can you cook?
I used to cook.
Wait a minute, you used to cook?
I used to cook. My wife is such an incredible cook. She cooks clean and it tastes good, right? But she's Puerto Rican and Black from Bridgeport, so she also knows how to get down when it's time to get down. So she has that so covered that I just do kitchen detail.
Oh, you clean up?
I clean up. I believe that you shouldn't have to cook and clean. So I'll clean up. Look, I'll wake up early in the morning just to make sure the kitchen is clear so she can come down and cook breakfast. We have a 7-year-old, so the breakfast has got to be prepared. So I'll make sure that everything's clean so she can get it in.
You are so happy and so at peace. That is wonderful.
Yeah, peace is priceless.
It shows. Thank you.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
are the best.
Thank you.
Oh, and that 7-year-old is going to be something else. She's going to be spoiled rotten.
Oh, she's.
Is she an actress yet?
She's probably going to be.
Yeah.
She said last year that she didn't want to be an actor. She wanted to be a director. Yes. Because she doesn't want to be told what to do. She wants to tell other people what to do.
Your child. You can hear Not All Hood on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Up next, meet the local entrepreneur who is not only serving up popular dishes, but also giving back to the tune of $1 million. Ebony Austin is a Midwestern girl raised by a Southern mother and grandmother in Chicago. Those Southern roots are her recipes for success in the restaurant business. She's someone you should know, since it took grit and grits to become a philanthropist, giving away $1 million in goods and services since 2020. We went one-on-one at her Nouveau Bar and Grill in Jonesboro. Ebony Austin grew up on the west side of Chicago. Her mother and grandmother were excellent cooks from Jackson, Mississippi. The family moved north because of the grandfather's business.
I grew up around entrepreneurs. My grandfather had his own construction company. My mother was part of that construction company, and my grandmother was almost like the accountant that made sure all the bills was paid and payroll was done. So for me, I got to see it on every angle of success very early. But I also grew in a household that there was so much love surrounded us. I just thought I was rich. I never knew I wasn't.
So when you were in high school, how would people describe you?
I've always been really outgoing, and I've always been very helpful. So I've always been almost like the teacher's pet, if you will. So I've always been in a place where I did a lot of tutoring and making sure like a lot of my friends were up to par with grades and making sure that we gave back to like students that had less than what we had in high school. So I've always been really big on giving back. I started very early from church, and that's just been who I am since then.
So when you said from church, are you a church girl?
Yes, ma'am. Kojic, Pentecostal. Yes, ma'am.
So how did that play into you deciding to go to school in Oklahoma?
That's what happened. I wanted to get away from my mother and my family, and I wanted to party. I was used to going to church 6 days out the week. So I figured if I got to a HBCU that was far and nobody would want to come to Oklahoma, I figured that I would actually get to see what life looked like without them directly, Bible class on Tuesday, choir rehearsal on Wednesday. So it was my scapegoat.
So you're out in the country in Oklahoma. I mean, that is Langston now University is the most far western HBCU and the only HBCU in the state of Oklahoma.
Yes, ma'am. And I had a blast the entire time. I didn't have to go to Bible class every day. I didn't have to do chores back to back. I had the best time of my life. The goal was to get away, and I accomplished it. They didn't come until it was time to graduate.
After college, she worked in retail for a while and moved to Atlanta. But she always remembered the food insecurity she experienced as a college student.
I go back to my college years, and I go back to being blessed with some friends that could loan me $1 to get chicken tenders from Burger King, right? But I also remember opening up canned goods worth a can of corn and being able to make a meal out of that. It was literally chicken tenders in a can of corn that would have to last me for days. And so I always remember where I come from, but I also am very, aware that much is given, much is required. So for me, God, I made a promise to him years ago that I'll never stand back or turn back on. The way that you bless me, I'll always give it back to the community 3 times.
She's done so much more. 5,000 families served at her annual toy drive, 2 families receiving townhomes, scholarships to HBCU students, food giveaways at HBCUs, all made possible by the sales of her 3 flavors of stone ground grits.
I launched that collection on my grandmother's birthday, who raised me, who passed, and I wanted to do something in honor of her. But I literally was praying to God, like, God, I don't feel like I'm doing enough, God, and I know that this vision is way bigger than me, and I know that you didn't put me here to stay right here and stay stagnant. And so I literally woke up and said, you know what? I prayed about it, and it said, Ebony, make your grit line, make all of the proceeds go to HBCU students. And ever since then, I have an amazing team that sits day to day with me, and they sell the grits. We're in 55 Food Lion stores, and now we're getting ready to go into 180 public stores. So I believe that if you write the vision and you make it plain, God will help you foresee that. And again, I think that it's having a great team. I have a great publicist. I have a great team that ultimately comes together to make my vision help the community. And so it's been an amazing ride.
But there was a major bump along the road. Her first restaurant in Atlanta, Stars, failed.
I learned a lot, and I learned how to execute the correct way in the restaurant space. I come from retail, so I was a business development manager for 12 years. So I learned a lot of what training looks like, what payroll looked like. But what I didn't understand was how to manage the people that sit directly next to me, because I came from a place where it was very disciplined in the retail world. I didn't understand that some people were gonna call off because they needed to get chips from Walmart, and I was gonna have to be the bartender. So what I learned was to learn how to be every part of my business. And that's what that taught me. Like, hey, Ebony, that's how I learned how to bartend and how to be a mixologist. I've never drank, so I don't know what the liquor tastes like, but I can see it and know if the drink is made correctly.
Do you have a socialite? Is there a special person in your life?
Ooh, Miss Pierce. You know what? I was in a relationship for 15 years. And so in those 15 years, I'm now focused on Ebony more than anything, and focused on how do I take care of Ebony. You know, when you're in a relationship, sometimes you pour into so much of yourself. And so for me now, I'm learning how to date. I'm learning, what's good for me, and how to separate myself, because even though we wasn't married, it felt like marriage. And we're great. We're amazing friends. We do amazing business, but sometimes you just have to kind of, go your separate ways. And if you come back, kudos. But if not, hey, that's okay too. But I'm learning how to date now in this phase. That's what I'm learning. I'm learning how to date.
So as much as you've had success, what has this business cost you?
You know what? For me, it's cost me a lot of my vacation time. So for the first 5 years, I didn't get the opportunity to vacation because I'm really in my business. I'm here on my day-to-day operations. But it also cost me learning that, Ebony, there are certain steps you have to have in place, right? The goal is to not just have Nouveau in Georgia, right? So I'm excited because I think that we've now mastered those steps, because now we're going into Dallas within the next 45 days. So we're excited about that. But for me, it was being able to delegate. Like, I wanted to do everything on my own. I wanted to be a host. I'm outside sweeping. I'm outside, making sure that everybody's getting in and making sure that the bar is operating in the kitchen. I had to learn that one person can't do this on their own. You have to trust the people that sit next to you. And that means you have to hire the right people and put them in the right position.
What is your dream for Nouveau?
I would like to see Nouveau in most major cities, right? That allows me to connect more with the community. It allows me to go out to different schools. It allowed me to pour into the children. I was just at a school for all girls, and we were able to go in and give them gift cards and, you know, spend a day with them, a day of what it looks like in their academy. So those are the moments that I'm proud of. Those are the moments that I will always base and build Nouveau around. So we will always be in a place where we can help community first.
Two favorite dishes on her menu are the sweet potato waffles, no syrup needed, with her mother's fried chicken recipe, and seafood and grits, salmon, shrimp, crab meat, and grits served in a huge martini glass. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. right here on Peachtree TV. If you want to see more of One-on-One, just subscribe to Peachtree TV on YouTube, where you can watch all the episodes. Good night.